Welcome to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Within this book contains poems by the strategist Sun Tzu, as well as what different generals think about his poems. These poems can be applied to everyday life as well as business and even warfare. Throughout, I shall only read the poems by Sun Tzu and let you interpret yourself what they mean. Chapter 1: Strategic Assessments. Sun Tzu says, military action is important to the nation. It is the ground of death and life, the path of survival and destruction. So, it is imperative to examine it. Sun Tzu says, therefore, measure in terms of 5 things. Use these assessments to make comparisons and thus find out what the conditions are. The 5 things are the way, the weather, the terrain, the leadership, and discipline. Sun Tzu says, the way means inducing the people to have the same aim as the leadership, so that they will share death and share life without fear of danger. Sun Tzu says, the weather means the seasons. Sun Tzu says, the terrain is to be assessed in terms of distance, difficulty, or ease of travel, dimension, and safety. Sun Tzu says, leadership is a matter of intelligence, trustworthiness, humaneness, courage, and sternness. Sun Tzu says, discipline means organization, chain of command, and logistics. Sun Tzu says, every general has heard of these 5 things. Those who know them prevail. Those who do not know them do not. Sun Tzu says, therefore, use these assessments for comparison to find out what the conditions are. That is to say, which political leadership has the way, which general has ability, who has the better climate and terrain, whose discipline is effective, whose troops are stronger, whose officers and soldiers are the better trained, whose system of rewards and punishment is clearer. This is how you can know who will win. Sun Tzu says, assess the advantages in taking advice, then structure your forces accordingly. To supplement extraordinary tactics, forces are to be structured strategically based on what is advantageous. Sun Tzu says, a military operation involves deception. Even though you are competent, appear to be incompetent. Though effective, appear to be ineffective. Sun Tzu says, when you are going to attack nearby, make it look as if you're going to go a long way. When you are going to attack far away, make it look as if you are just going a short distance. Sun Tzu says, draw them in with the prospect of gain, take them by confusion. Sun Tzu says, when they are fulfilled, be prepared against them. When they are strong, avoid them. Sun Tzu says, use anger to throw them into disarray. Sun Tzu says, use humility to make them haughty. Sun Tzu says, hire them by flight. Sun Tzu says, cause division among them. Sun Tzu says, attack when they are unprepared. Make your move when they do not expect it. Sun Tzu says, the formation and procedure used by the military should not be divulged beforehand. Sun Tzu says, the one who figures on victory at headquarters before even doing battle is the one who has the most strategic factors on his side. The one who figures on inability to prevail at headquarters before doing battle is the one who has the least strategic factors on his side. The one with many strategic factors in his favor wins. The one with few strategic factors in his favor loses. How much the more so for no one with no strategic factors in his favor. Observing the matter in this way, I can see who will win and who will lose. That is the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Doing battle. Sun Tzu says, when you do battle, even if you are winning, if you continue for a long time, it will dull your forces and blunt your edge. If you besiege a citadel, your strength will be exhausted. If you keep your armies out in the field for a long time, your supplies will be insufficient. Sun Tzu says, when your forces are dulled, your edge is blunted, your strength is exhausted, and your supplies are gone, then others will take advantage of your debility and rise up. Then even if you have wise advisors, you cannot make things turn out well in the end. Sun Tzu says, therefore, I have heard of military operations that were clumsy but swift, but I have never seen one that was skillful and lasted a long time. It is never beneficial to a nation to have a military operation continue for a long time. Sun Tzu says, therefore, those who are not thoroughly aware of the disadvantages in the use of arms cannot be thoroughly aware of the advantages in the use of arms. Sun Tzu says, those who use the military skillfully do not raise troops twice and do not provide food 3 times. Sun Tzu says, by taking equipment from your own country but feeding off the enemy, you can be sufficient in both arms and provision. Sun Tzu says, when a country is impoverished by military operations, it is because of transporting supplies to a distant place. transport supplies to a distant place, and the populace will be impoverished. Sun Tzu says, those who are near the army sell at high prices. Because of high prices, the wealth of the common people is exhausted. Sun Tzu says, when resources are exhausted, then levies are made under pressure. When power and resources are exhausted, then the homeland is drained. The common people are deprived of 70% of their budget, while the government's expense for equipment amount to 60% of its budget. Sun Tzu says, therefore a wise general strives to feed off the enemy. Each pound of food taken from the enemy is equivalent to 20 pounds you provide by yourself. Sun Tzu says, so what kills the enemy is anger. What gets the enemy's goods is reward. Sun Tzu says, therefore in a chariot battle, reward the first to capture at least 10 chariots. Sun Tzu says, change their colors, use them mixed in with your own. Treat the soldiers well, take care of them. Sun Tzu says, this is called overcoming the opponent and increasing your strength to boot. Sun Tzu says, so the important thing in a military operation is victory, not persistence. Sun Tzu says, hence we know that the leader of the army is in charge of the lives of the people and the safety of the nation. This is the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Planning a Siege. Sun Tzu says, the general rule for use of the military is that it is better to keep a nation intact than to destroy it. It is better to keep an army intact than to destroy it. Better to keep a division intact than to destroy it. Better to keep a battalion intact than to destroy it. Better to keep a unit intact than to destroy it. Sun Tzu says, therefore, those who win every battle are not really skillful. Those who render other armies helpless without fighting are the best of all. Sun Tzu says, therefore, the superior militarist strikes while schemes are being laid. Sun Tzu says, the next best is to attack alliances. Sun Tzu says, the next best is to attack the army. Sun Tzu says, the lowest is to attack a city. Siege of a city is only done as a last resort. Sun Tzu says, take 3 months to prepare your machines and 3 months to complete your siege engineering. Sun Tzu says, if the general cannot overcome his anger and has his army swarm over the citadel, killing a third of his soldiers, and yet the citadel is still not taken, this is a disastrous attack. Sun Tzu says, therefore one who is good at martial arts overcomes others' forces without battle, conquers other cities without siege, destroys others' nations without taking a long time. Sun Tzu says, it is imperative to contest all factions for complete victory, so the army is not garrisoned and the profit can be total. This is the law of strategic siege. Sun Tzu says, so the rule for use of the military is that if you are outnumbered the opponent 10 to 1, then surround them. 5 to 1, attack. 2 to 1, divide. Sun Tzu says, if you are equal, then fight if you are able. If you are fewer, then keep away if you are able. If you are not as good, then flee if you are able. Sun Tzu says, therefore, if the smaller side is stubborn, it becomes the captive of the larger side. Sun Tzu says, generals are assistants to the nation. When their assistance is complete, the country is strong. When their assistance is defective, the country is weak. Sun Tzu says, so there are 3 ways in which a civil leadership causes the military trouble. When a civil leadership, unaware of the facts, tells its armies to advance when it should not, or tells its armies to retreat when it should not. This is called tying up the armies. When the civil leadership is ignorant of military affairs but shares equally in the government of the armies, the soldiers get confused. When the civil leadership is ignorant of military maneuvers but shares equally in the command of the armies, the soldiers hesitate. Once the armies are confused and hesitant, trouble comes from competitors. This is called taking away victory by deranging the military. Sun Tzu says, so there are 5 ways of knowing who will win. Those who know when to fight and when not to fight are victorious. Those who discern when to use many or few troops are victorious. Those whose upper and lower ranks have the same desire are victorious. Those who face the unprepared with preparation are victorious. Those whose generals are able and are not constrained by their governments are victorious. These 5 are the ways to know who will win. Sun Tzu says, so it is said that if you know others and know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. If you do not know others but know yourself, you win one and lose one. If you do not know others and do not know yourself, you will be imperiled in every single battle. This is the end of Chapter 3. Chapter 4, Formation. Sun Tzu says, in ancient times, skillful warriors first made themselves invincible and then watched for vulnerability in their opponents. Sun Tzu says, invincibility is in oneself. Vulnerability is in the opponent. Sun Tzu says, therefore, skillful warriors are able to be invincible, but they cannot cause opponents to be vulnerable. Sun Tzu says, that is why it is said that victory can be discerned but not manufactured. Sun Tzu says, invincibility is a matter of defense, vulnerability is a matter of attack. Sun Tzu says, defense is for times of insufficiency. Attack is for times of surplus. Sun Tzu says, those skilled in defense hide in the deepest depths of the earth. Those skilled in attack maneuver in the highest heights of the sky. Therefore, they can preserve themselves and achieve complete victory. Sun Tzu says, to perceive victory when it is known to all is not really skillful. Everyone calls victory in battle good, but it is not really good. Sun Tzu says, it does not take much strength to lift a hair. It does not take sharp eyes to see the sun and moon. It does not take sharp ears to hear a thunderclap. Sun Tzu says, in ancient times, those known as good warriors prevailed when it was easy to prevail. Sun Tzu says, therefore, the victories of good warriors are not noted for cleverness or bravery. Therefore, their victories in battle are not flukes. Their victories are not flukes because they position themselves where they will surely win, prevailing over those who have already lost. Sun Tzu says, so it is that good warriors take their stand on ground where they cannot lose, and do not overlook conditions that make an opponent prone to defeat. Sun Tzu says, therefore, a victorious army first wins and then seeks battle. A defeated army first battles and then seeks victory. Sun Tzu says, those who use arms well cultivate the way and keep the rules. Thus, they can govern in such a way as to prevail over the corrupt. Sun Tzu says, the rules of the military are 5: measurement, assessment, calculation, comparison, and victory. The ground gives rise to measurements. Measurements give rise to assessments. Assessments give rise to calculation. Calculation gives rise to comparison. Comparison gives rise to victories. Sun Tzu says, therefore, a victorious army is like a pound compared to a gram. A defeated army is like a gram compared to a pound. When the victories of their people go to battle as if they were directing a massive flood of water into a deep canyon, this is a matter of formation. This is the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Force. Sun Tzu says, governing a large number as though governing a small number is a matter of division into groups. Battling a large number as though battling a small number is a matter of forms and calls. Sun Tzu says, making the armies able to take on opponents without being defeated is a matter of unorthodox or orthodox methods. Sun Tzu says, for the impact of armed forces to be like stones thrown on eggs is a matter of emptiness and fullness. Sun Tzu says, in battle, confrontation is done directly. Victory is gained by surprise. Sun Tzu says, therefore those skilled at the unorthodox are infinite as heaven and earth, inexhaustible as the great rivers. When they come to an end, they begin anew. Like the days and months, they die and are reborn, like the 4 seasons. Sun Tzu says, there are only 5 notes in the musical scale, but their variations are so many that they cannot all be heard. There are only 5 basic colors, but their variations are so many that they cannot all be seen. There are only 5 basic flavors, but their variations are so many that they cannot all be tasted. There are only 2 kinds of charge in battle, the unorthodox surprise attack and the orthodox direct attack. But variations of the unorthodox and the orthodox are endless. The unorthodox and the orthodox give rise to each other like a beginningless cycle. Who could exhaust them? Sun Tzu says, when the speed of rushing water reaches the point where it can move boulders, this is the force of momentum. When the speed of a hawk is such that it can strike and kill, this is precision. So it is with skillful warriors. Their force is swift, their precision is close, their force is like drawing a catapult, their precision is like releasing the trigger. Sun Tzu says, disorder arises from order. Cowardice arises from courage. Weakness arises from strength. Sun Tzu says, order and disorder are a matter of organization. Courage and cowardice are a matter of momentum. Strength and weakness are a matter of formation. Sun Tzu says, therefore those who skillfully move opponents make formations that opponents are sure to follow. Give what opponents are sure to take. They move opponents with the prospect of gain, waiting for them in ambush. Sun Tzu says, therefore good warriors seek effectiveness in battle from the force of momentum, not from individual people. Therefore, they are able to choose people and let the force of momentum do its work. Sun Tzu says, getting people to fight by letting the force of momentum work is like rolling logs and rocks. Logs and rocks are still when in secure place, but roll on an incline. They remain stationary if square, they roll if round. Therefore, when people are skillfully led into battle, the momentum is like that of round rocks rolling down a high mountain. This is force. This is the end of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Emptiness and Fullness. Sun Tzu says, those who are first on the battlefield and await the opponents are at ease. Those who are last on the battlefield and head into battle get worn out. Sun Tzu says, therefore, good warriors cause others to come to them and do not go to others. Sun Tzu says, what causes opponents to come of their own accord is the prospect of gain. What discourages opponents from coming is the prospect of harm. Sun Tzu says, so when opponents are at ease, it is possible to tire them. When they are well fed, it is possible to starve them. When they are at rest, it is possible to move them. Sun Tzu says, appear where they cannot go. Head for where they least expect you. To travel hundreds of miles without fatigue. Go over land where there are no people. Sun Tzu says, to unfailingly take what you attack. Attack where there is no defense. For unfailingly secure defense. Defend where there is no attack. Sun Tzu says, so in the case of those who are skilled in attack, their opponents do not know where to defend. In the case of those skilled in defense, their opponents do not know where to attack. Sun Tzu says, be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby you can be the director of the opponent's fate. Sun Tzu says, to advance irresistibly, push through their gaps. To retreat elusively, outspeed them. Sun Tzu says, therefore, when you want to do battle, even if the opponent is deeply entrenched in a defensive position, he will be unable to avoid fighting if you attack where he will surely go to the rescue. Sun Tzu says, when you do not want to do battle, even if you draw a line on the ground to hold, the opponent cannot fight with you because you set him off on the wrong track. Sun Tzu says, therefore, when you induce others to construct a formation while you yourself are formless, then you are concentrated while the opponent is divided. Sun Tzu says, when you are concentrated into one while the opponent is divided into 10, you are attacking at a concentration of 10 to 1, so you outnumber the opponent. Sun Tzu says, if you can strike few with many, you will thus minimize the number of those with whom you do battle. Sun Tzu says, your battleground is not to be known, for when it cannot be known, the enemy makes many guard outposts, and since multiple outposts are established, you only have to do battle with small squads. Sun Tzu says, so when the front is prepared, the rear is lacking, and when the rear is prepared, the front is lacking. Preparedness on the left means lack on the right. Preparedness on the right means lack on the left. Preparedness everywhere means lack everywhere. Sun Tzu says, The few are those on the defensive against others. The many are those who cause others to be on the defensive against themselves. Sun Tzu says, "So if you know the place and time of battle, you can join the fight from 1,000 miles away. If you do not know the place and time of battle, then your left flank cannot save your right cannot save your left, your vanguard cannot save your rear guard, and your rear guard cannot save your vanguard, even in a short range of a few dozen miles." Sun Tzu says, "According to my assessment, even if you have many more troops than others, how can that help you to victory?" Sun Tzu says, "So it is said that victory can be made." Sun Tzu says, "Even if opponents are numerous, they can be made not to fight." Sun Tzu says, "So assess them to find out their plans, both the successful ones and the failures. Incite them to action in order to find out the patterns of their movement and rest." Sun Tzu says, "Induce them to adopt specific formations in order to know the ground of death and life." Sun Tzu says, "Test them to find out where they are sufficient and where they are lacking." Sun Tzu says, "Therefore, the consummation of forming an army is to arrive at formlessness. When you have no form, undercover espionage cannot find out anything. Intelligence cannot form a strategy." Sun Tzu says, "Victory over multitudes by means of formation is unknowable to the multitudes. Everyone knows the form by which I am victorious, but no one knows the form by which I ensure victory." Sun Tzu says, "Therefore, in war is not repetitious, but adapts its form endlessly." Sun Tzu says, "Military formation is like water. The form of water is to avoid the high and go to the low. The form of a military force is to avoid the full and attack the empty. The flow of water is determined by the earth. The victory of a military force is determined by the opponent." Sun Tzu says, "So a military force has no constant formation. Water has no constant shape. The ability to gain victory by changing and adapting according to the opponent is called genius." This is the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7. Armed Struggle. Sun Tzu says, "The ordinary rule for use of military force is for the military command to receive the orders from the civilian authorities, then to gather and mass the troops, quartering them together. Nothing is harder than armed struggle." Sun Tzu says, "The difficulty of armed struggle is to make long distances near and make problems into advantages." Sun Tzu says, "Therefore, you make their route a long one, luring them on in hopes of gain. When you set out after others and arrive before them, you know the strategy of making the distant near." Sun Tzu says, therefore armed struggle is considered profitable, and armed struggle is considered dangerous. Sun Tzu says, to mobilize the whole army to struggle for advantage would take too long. Yet to struggle for advantage with a stripped-down army results in a lack of equipment. So if you travel light, not stopping day or night, doubling your usual pace, struggling for an advantage 100 miles away, your military leaders will be captured. Strong soldiers will get there first, the weary later on. As a rule, 1 in 10 make it. Sun Tzu says, struggling for an advantage 50 miles away will thwart the forward leadership, and as a rule, only 50% of the soldiers make it. Sun Tzu says, so if you do not know the plans of your competitors, you cannot make informed alliances. Sun Tzu says, so an army perishes if it has no equipment, it perishes if it has no food, and it perishes if it has no money. Sun Tzu says, unless you know the mountains and forests, the defiles and impasses, and the lay of the marshes and swamps, you cannot maneuver with an armed force unless you use local guides. You cannot get the advantages of the land. Sun Tzu says, so a military force is established by deception, mobilized by gain, and adapted by division and combination. Sun Tzu says, therefore, when it moves swiftly, it is like the wind. When it goes slowly, it is like a forest. It is as rapacious as fire, immovable as mountains. Sun Tzu says, it is as hard to know as the dark. Its movement is like pealing thunder. Sun Tzu says, to plunder a locality, divide up your troops. To expand your territory, divide the spoils. Sun Tzu says, act after having made assessments. The one who first knows the measures of far and near wins. This is the rule of armed struggle. Sun Tzu says, an ancient book of military order says, words are not heard, so cymbals and drums are made. Owing to lack of visibility, banners and flags are made. Cymbals, drums, banners, and flags are used to focus and unify people's ears and eyes. Once people are unified, the brave cannot proceed alone. The timid cannot retreat alone. This is the rule for employing a group. Sun Tzu says, so in night battles you use many fires and drums. In daytime battles you use many banners and flags, so as to manipulate people's ears and eyes. Sun Tzu says, so you should take away the energy of their armies and take away the heart of their generals. Sun Tzu says, so morning energy is keen, midday energy slumps, evening energy recedes. Therefore, those skilled in use of arms avoid the keen energy and strike the slumping and receding. These are those who master energy. Sun Tzu says, using order to deal with the disorderly, using calm to deal with the clamorous, is mastering the heart. Sun Tzu says, standing your ground, awaiting those far away, awaiting the weary in comfort, awaiting the hungry with full stomachs, is mastering strength. Sun Tzu says, avoiding confrontation with orderly ranks and not attacking great formations is mastering adaptation. Sun Tzu says, so the rule for military operation is not to face a high hill and not to oppose those with their backs to a hill. Sun Tzu says, do not follow a feigned retreat. Do not attack crack troops. Sun Tzu says, do not eat food for their soldiers. Sun Tzu says, do not stop an army on its way home. Sun Tzu says, a surrounded army must be given a way out. Sun Tzu says, do not press a desperate enemy. Sun Tzu says that these are rules of military operation. This is the end of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Adaptations. Sun Tzu says the general use for military operation is that the military leadership receives the order from the civilian leadership to gather armies. Let there be no encampment on difficult terrain. Let diplomatic relations be established at borders. Do not stay in barren or isolated territory. When on surrounded ground, plot. When on deadly ground, fight. Sun Tzu says there are routes not to be followed, armies not to be attacked, citadels not to be besieged, territory not to be fought over, orders of civilian governments not to be obeyed. Sun Tzu says, therefore, generals who know all possible adaptations to take advantage of the ground know how to use military forces. If generals do not know how to adapt advantageously, even if they know the lay of the land, they cannot take advantage of it. If they rule armies without knowing the arts of complete adaptivity, even if they know what there is to gain, they cannot get people to work for them. Sun Tzu says, therefore, the consideration of the intelligent always include both benefit and harm. As they consider benefit, their work can expand. As they consider harm, their troubles can be resolved. Sun Tzu says, therefore, what restrains competitors is harm. What keeps competitors busy is work. What motivates competitors is profit. Sun Tzu says, so the rule of military operation is not to count on opponents not coming, but to rely on having ways of dealing with them. Not to count on opponents not attacking, but to rely on having what cannot be attacked. Sun Tzu says, therefore, there are 5 traits that are dangerous to generals. Those who are ready to die can be killed. Those who are intent on living can be captured. Those who are quick to anger can be shamed. Those who are puritanical can be disgraced. Those who love people can be troubled. Sun Tzu says, these 5 things are faults in generals, disasters for military operation. This is the end of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Maneuvering Armies. Sun Tzu says, whenever you station an army to observe an opponent, cut off the mountains and stay by the valleys. Sun Tzu says, watch the light, stay on the heights. When fighting on a hill, do not climb. This applies to an army in the mountains. Sun Tzu says, when cut off by water, always stay away from the water. Do not meet them in the water. It is advantageous to let half of them cross and then attack them. Sun Tzu says, when you want to fight, do not face an enemy near water. Watch the light, stay in high places. Do not face the current of the water. This applies to an army on water. Sun Tzu says, go right through salt marshes. Just go quickly and do not tarry. If you run into an army in the middle of a salt marsh, stay by the water plants, with your back to the trees. This applies to an army in a salt marsh. Sun Tzu says, on a level plateau, take up positions where it is easy to maneuver, keeping higher land to your right rear with low ground in front and high ground behind. This applies to an army on a plateau. Sun Tzu says, it was by taking advantage of the situation in these 4 basic ways that the Yellow Emperor overcame 4 lords. Sun Tzu says, ordinarily an army likes high places and dislikes low grounds, values hard light, values light and despises darkness. Sun Tzu says, take care of physical health and stay where there are plenty of resources. When there is no sickness in the army, it is said to be invincible. Sun Tzu says, when there are hills or embankment, keep on their sunny side, with them to your right rear. This is an advantage to a military force, the help of the land. Sun Tzu says, when it rains upstream and froth is coming down on the current, if you want to cross, wait until it settles. Sun Tzu says, whenever the terrain has impassable ravines, natural enclosures, natural prisons, natural traps, natural pitfalls, and natural clefts, you should leave quickly and not get near them. For myself, I keep away from these, so that opponents are nearer to them. I keep my face to these, so that opponents have their backs to them. Sun Tzu says, when an army is traveling, if there is hilly territory with many streams and ponds or depressions overgrown with reeds, or wild forests with a luxuriant growth of plants and trees, it is imperative to search them carefully and thoroughly, for these afford stations for bushwhackers and spoilers. Sun Tzu says, when the enemy is near but still, he is resting on a natural stronghold. When he is far away but tries to provoke hostilities, he wants you to move forward. If his position is accessible, it is because it is advantageous to him. Sun Tzu says, when the trees move, the enemy is coming. When there are many blinds in the undergrowth, it is misdirection. Sun Tzu says, if birds start up, there are ambushers there. If the animals are frightened, there are attackers there. If dust rises high and sharp, vehicles are coming. If it is low and wide, foot soldiers are coming. Scattered wisps of smoke indicate woodcutters. Relatively small amounts of dust coming and going indicate setting up camp. Sun Tzu says, those who work are humble, while they increase war preparations are going to advance. Those whose words are strong and who advance aggressively are going to retreat. Sun Tzu says, when light vehicles come out first and stay to the side, they are going to set up a battle line. Sun Tzu says, those who come seeking peace without a treaty are plotting. Sun Tzu says, those who busily set out arrays of armed vehicles are expecting reinforcements. Sun Tzu says, if half their force advances and half retreats, they are trying to lure you. Sun Tzu says, if they brace themselves as they stand, they are starving. When those sent to draw water first drink themselves, they are thirsty. Sun Tzu says, when they see an advantage but do not advance on it, they are weary. Sun Tzu says, if birds are gathered there, the place has been vacated. Sun Tzu says, if there are calls in the night, they are afraid. Sun Tzu says, if the army is unsettled, it means the general is not taken seriously. Sun Tzu says, if signals move, that means they are in confusion. Sun Tzu says, if their emissaries are irritable, it means they are tired. Sun Tzu says, when they kill their horses for meat, it means that the soldiers have no food. When they have no pots and do not go back to their quarters, they are desperate adversaries. Sun Tzu says, when there are murmurings, lapses in duties, and extended conversations, the loyalty of the group has been lost. Sun Tzu says, when they give out numerous rewards, it means they are at an impasse. When they give out numerous punishment, it means they are worn out. Sun Tzu says, to be violent at first and wind up fearing one's peoples is the epitome of ineptitude. Sun Tzu says, those who come in a conciliatory manner want to rest. Sun Tzu says, when forces angrily confront you but delay engagement, yet do not leave, it is imperative to watch them carefully. Sun Tzu says, in military matters, it is not necessarily beneficial to have more strength, only to avoid acting aggressively. It is enough to consolidate your power, assess opponents, and get people. That is all. Sun Tzu says, the individualist without strategy who takes opponents lightly will inevitably become the captive of others. Sun Tzu says, if soldiers are punished before a personal attachment to the leadership is formed, they will not submit. And if they do not submit, they are hard to employ. Sun Tzu says, if punishments are not executed, after personnel attachment has been established with the soldiers. Then they cannot be employed. Sun Tzu says, therefore, direct them through cultural arts, unify them through martial arts. This means certain victory. Sun Tzu says, when directives are consistently carried out to edify the populace accepts. When directives are not consistently carried out to edify the populace does not accept. When directives are consistently carried out, there is mutual satisfaction between the leadership and the group. This is the end of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Terrain. Sun Tzu says, some terrain is easily passable. In some, you get hung up. Some makes for a standoff. Some is narrow, some is steep. Some is wide open. When both sides can come and go, the terrain is said to be easily passable. When the terrain is easily passable, take up your position first, choosing the high and sunny side, convenient to supply routes, for advantage in battle. When you can go but have a hard time getting back, you are said to be hung up. On this type of terrain, if the opponent is unprepared, you will prevail if you go forth. But if the enemy is prepared, if you go forth and do not prevail, you will have a hard time getting back to your disadvantage. When it is disadvantageous for either side to go forth, it is called standoff terrain. On standoff terrain, even though the opponent offers you an advantage, you do not go for it. You withdraw, inducing the enemy half out, and then you attack to your advantage. On narrow terrain, if you are there first, you should fill it up to await the opponent. If the opponent is there first, do not pursue. If the opponent fills the narrows, pursue if the opponent does not fill the narrows. On steep terrain, if you are there first, you should occupy the high and sunny side to await the opponent. If the opponent is there first, withdraw from there and do not pursue. On wide open terrain, the force of momentum is equalized, and it is hard to make a challenge, disadvantageous to fight. Understanding these 6 kinds of terrain is the highest responsibility of the general, and it is imperative to examine them. Sun Tzu says, so among military forces, there are those who rush, those who tarry, those who fall, those who crumble, those who riot, and those who get beaten. These are not natural disasters, but faults of the generals. Those who have equal momentum but strike 10 with 1 are in a rush. Those whose soldiers are strong but whose officers are weak tarry. Those whose officers are strong but whose soldiers are weak fall. When colonels are angry and obstreperous and fight on their own out of spite, when they meet opponents and the generals do not know their abilities, they crumble. Sun Tzu says, when the generals are weak and lack authority, instructions are not clear, officers and soldiers lack consistency, and they form battle lines every which way. This is riot. When the generals cannot assess opponents, clash with much greater numbers or more powerful forces, and do not sort out the levels of skill among their own troop, these are the ones who get beaten. Sun Tzu says, These 6 are ways of defeat. Understanding this is the ultimate responsibility of the generals. They must be examined. Sun Tzu says, the contour of the land is an aid to an army, sizing up opponents to determine victory, assessing dangers and distances is the proper course of action for military leaders. Those who do battle knowing these will win. Those who do battle without knowing these will lose. Sun Tzu says, therefore, when the laws of war indicate certain victory, it is surely appropriate to do battle, even if the government says there is to be no battle. If the laws of war do not indicate victory, it is appropriate not to do battle, even if the government orders war. Thus, one advances without seeking glory, retreats without avoiding blame, only protecting people to the benefit of the government as well, thus rendering valuable service to the nation. Sun Tzu says, look upon your soldiers as you do infants, and they willingly go into deep valleys with you. Look upon your soldiers as beloved children, and they willingly die with you. Sun Tzu says, if you are so nice to them that you cannot employ them, so kind to them that you cannot command them, so casual with them that you cannot establish order, they are like spoiled children, useless. Sun Tzu says, if you know your soldiers are capable of striking, but do not know whether the enemy is invulnerable to strike, you have half a chance of winning. If you know the enemy is vulnerable to a strike, but do not know if your soldiers are incapable of making such a strike, you have half a chance of winning. If you know the enemy is vulnerable to a strike and know your soldiers can make the strike, but do not know if the lay of the land makes it unsuitable for battle, you have half a chance of winning. Sun Tzu says, therefore, those who know martial arts do not wander when they move, and do not become exhausted when they rise up. So it is said that when you know yourself and others, victory is not in danger. When you know sky and earth, victory is inexhaustible. This is the end of chapter 10. Chapter 11, 9 Grounds. Sun Tzu says, according to the rule for military operations, there are 9 kinds of ground, where local interests fight among themselves on their own territory. This is called a ground of dissolution. Sun Tzu says, when you enter others' land, but not deeply, this is called light ground. Sun Tzu says, land that would be advantageous to you if you got it, and to opponents if they got it, is called ground of contention. Sun Tzu says, land where you and others can come and go is called a traffic ground. Sun Tzu says, land that is surrounded on 3 sides by competitors and would give the first to get it access to all the people on the continent is called intersecting ground. Sun Tzu says, when you enter deeply into others' land, past many cities and towns, this is called heavy ground. Sun Tzu says, when you traverse mountain forests, steep defiles, marshes, or any route difficult to travel, this is called bad ground. Sun Tzu says, when the way in is narrow and the way out is circuitous, so a small enemy force can strike you, even though your numbers are greater. This is called surrounded ground. Sun Tzu says, "When you will survive if you fight quickly and perish if you do not. This is called dying ground." Sun Tzu says, "So let there be no battle on the ground of dissolution. Let there be no stopping on light ground. Let there be no attack on the ground of contention. Let there be no cutting off of traffic ground. On intersecting ground form communications. On heavy ground, plunder. On bad ground, keep going. On surrounded ground, make plans. On dying grounds, fight." Sun Tzu says, "Those who are called the good militarists of old could make opponents lose contact between front and back lines, lose reliability between large and small groups, lose mutual concern for the welfare of the different social classes among them, lose mutual accommodation between the rulers and the ruled, lose enlistments among the soldiers, lose coherence within the armies. They went into action when it was advantageous, stopped when it was not." Sun Tzu says, "It may be asked, when a large, well-organized opponent is about to come to you, how do you deal with it? The answer is that you first take away what they like, and then they will listen to you." Sun Tzu says, "The condition of a military force is that its essential factor is speed, taking advantage of others' failure to catch up, going by routes they do not expect, attacking when they are not on guard." Sun Tzu says, "In general, the pattern of invasion is that invaders become more intense the farther they enter alien territory, to the point where the native rulership cannot overcome them." Sun Tzu says, "Glean from rice fields, and the armies will have enough to eat. Take care of your health and avoid stress. Consolidate your energy and build up your strength. Maneuver your troops and assess strategies so as to be unfathomable." Sun Tzu says, "Put them in a spot where they have no place to go, and they will die before fleeing. If they are to die there, what can they not do? Warriors exert their full strength. When warriors are in great danger, then they have no fear. When there is nowhere to go, they are firm. When they are deeply involved, they stick to it. If they have no choice, they will fight." Sun Tzu says, "For this reason, the soldiers are alert without being drilled, enlist without being drafted, are friendly without treaties, are trustworthy without commands." Sun Tzu says, "Prohibit omens to get rid of doubt, and soldiers will never leave you. If your soldiers have no extra goods, it is not that they dislike material goods. If they have no more life, it is not that they do not want to live long. On the day the order to march goes out, the soldiers weep." Sun Tzu says, "So a skillful military operation should be like a swift snake that counters with its tail when someone strikes at its head, counters with its head when someone strikes at its tail, and counters with both head and tail when someone strikes at its middle." Sun Tzu says, "The question may be asked, can a military force be made to be like this swift snake? The answer is that it can. Even people who dislike each other, if in the same boat, will help each other out in trouble. Sun Tzu says, therefore, tethered horses and buried wheels are not sufficiently reliable. Sun Tzu says, to even out bravery and make it uniform is the Tao of organization. To be successful with both the hard and soft is based on the pattern of the ground. Sun Tzu says, therefore those skilled in military operations achieve cooperation in a group so that directing the group is like directing a single individual with no other choice. Sun Tzu says, the business of the general is quiet and secret, fair and orderly. Sun Tzu says, he can keep the soldiers unaware, make them ignorant. Sun Tzu says, he changes his actions and revises his plans so that people will not recognize him. He changes his abode and goes by a circuitous route so that people cannot anticipate him. Sun Tzu says, when a leader establishes a goal with the troops, he is like one who climbs up to a high place and then tosses away the ladder. When a leader enters deeply into enemy territory with the troops, he brings out their potential. He has them burn the boats and destroy the pots, drives them like sheep, none knowing where they are going. Sun Tzu says, to assemble armies and put them into dangerous situations is the business of generals. Adaptations to different grounds, advantages of contraction and expansion, patterns of human feelings and conditions, these must be examined. Sun Tzu says, generally, the way it is with invaders is that they unite when deep in enemy territory, but are prone to dissolve while on the fringes. When you leave your country and cross the border on a military operation, that is isolated ground. When it is accessible from all directions, it is trafficked ground. When penetration is deep, that is heavy ground. When penetration is shallow, that is light ground. When your back is to an impassable fastness and before you are narrow straits, that is surrounded grounds. When there is nowhere to go, that is deadly grounds. So on a ground of dissolution, I would unify the minds of the troops. On light ground, I would have them keep in touch. On a ground of contention, I would have them follow up quickly. On an intersecting ground, I would be careful about defense. On a trafficked ground, I would make alliances firm. On heavy ground, I would ensure continuous supplies. On bad ground, I would urge them onward. On surrounded ground, I would close up the gaps. On deadly ground, I would indicate to them that there is no surviving. So the psychology of soldiers is to resist when surrounded, fight when it cannot be avoided, and obey in extremes. Sun Tzu says, therefore, those who do not know the plans of competitors cannot prepare alliances. Those who do not know the lay of the land cannot maneuver their forces. Those who do not use local guides cannot take advantage of the ground. The military of an effective rulership must know all these things. When the military of an effective rulership attacks a large country, the people cannot unite. When its power overwhelms opponents, alliances cannot come together. Sun Tzu says, therefore, if you do not compete for alliances anywhere, Do not foster authority anywhere, but just extend your personal influence, threatening opponents. This makes town and country vulnerable. Sun Tzu says, give out rewards that are not in the rules. Give out directives that are not in the code. Sun Tzu says, employ the entire armed forces like employing a single person. Employ them with actual tasks. Do not talk to them. Motivate them with benefits. Do not tell them about harm. Sun Tzu says, confront them with annihilation and they will survive. Plunge them into a deadly situation and they will then live. When people fall into danger, they are then able to strive for victory. Sun Tzu says, so the task of a military operation is to accord deceptively with the intentions of the enemy. If you concentrate totally on the enemy, you can kill its military leadership 1,000 miles away. This is skillful accomplishment of the task. Sun Tzu says, so on the day war is declared, borders are closed, passports are torn up, and emissaries are not let through. Sun Tzu says, matters are dealt with strictly at headquarters. Sun Tzu says, when opponents present openings, you should penetrate them immediately. Get to what they want first. Subtly anticipate them. Maintain discipline and adapt to the enemy in order to determine the outcome of the war. Thus, at first you are like a maiden, so the enemy opens his door. Then you are like a rabbit on the loose, so the enemy cannot keep you out. This is the end of chapter 11. Chapter 12, Fire Attack. Sun Tzu says, there are 5 kinds of fire attack. Burning people, burning supplies, burning equipment, burning storehouses, and burning weapons. The use of fire must have a basis and requires certain tools. There are appropriate times for setting fires, namely when the weather is dry and windy. Generally, in fire attacks, it is imperative to follow up on the crisis caused by the fires. When fire is set inside an enemy camp, then respond quickly from outside. If the soldiers are calm when fire breaks out, wait, do not attack. When the fire reaches the height of its power, follow up if possible, hold back if not. Sun Tzu says, when fire can be set out in the open, do not wait until it can be set inside a camp. Set it when the time is right. Sun Tzu says, when fire is set upwind, do not attack downwind. Sun Tzu says, if it is windy during the day, the wind will stop at night. Sun Tzu says, armies must know that there are adaptations of the 5 kinds of fire attack and adhere to them scientifically. Sun Tzu says, so the use of fire to help an attack means clarity. Use of water to help an attack means strength. Water can cut off, but cannot plunder. Sun Tzu says, to win in battle or make a successful siege without rewarding the meritorious is unlucky and earns the name of stinginess. Therefore, it is said that an enlightened government considers this, and good military leadership rewards merit. They do not mobilize when there is no advantage. They do not act when there is nothing to gain. Do not fight when there is no danger. Sun Tzu says, a government should not mobilize an army out of anger. Military leaders should not provoke war out of wrath. Act when it is beneficial, desist if it is not. Anger can revert to joy, wrath can revert to delight, but a nation destroyed cannot be restored to existence, and the dead cannot be restored to life. Therefore, an enlightened government is careful about this. A good military leadership is alert to this. This is the way to secure a nation and keep the armed forces whole. This is the end of chapter 12. Chapter 13, on the use of spies. Sun Tzu says, a major military operation is a severe drain on a nation and may be kept up for years in the struggle for one day's victory. So to fail to know the conditions of opponents because of reluctance to give rewards for intelligence is extremely inhumane, uncharacteristic of a true military leader, uncharacteristic of an assistant of the government, uncharacteristic of a victorious chief. So what enables an intelligent government and a wise military leadership to overcome others and achieve extraordinary accomplishments is foreknowledge. Foreknowledge cannot be gotten from ghosts and spirits, cannot be had by analogy, cannot be found out by calculation. It must be obtained from people who know the conditions of the enemy. There are 5 kinds of spy: the local spy, the inside spy, the reverse spy, the dead spy, and the living spy. When the 5 kinds of spies are all active, no one knows their routes. This is called organizational genius and is valuable to the leadership. Local spies are hired from among the people of a locality. Inside spies are hired from among enemy officials. Reverse spies are hired from among enemy spies. Dead spies transmit false intelligence to enemy spies. Living spies come back to report. Sun Tzu says, therefore, no one in the armed forces is treated as familiarly as are spies. No one is given rewards as rich as those given to spies, and no matter is more secret than espionage. Sun Tzu says, one cannot use spies without sagacity and knowledge. One cannot use spies without humanity and justice. One cannot get the truth from spies without subtlety. This is a very delicate matter indeed. Spies are useful everywhere. Sun Tzu says, if an item of intelligence is heard before a spy reports it, then both the spy and the one who told about it die. Sun Tzu says, whenever you want to attack an army, besiege a city, or kill a person, first you must know the identities of their defending generals, their associates, their visitors, their gatekeepers, and their chamberlains. So have your spies find out. Sun Tzu says, you must seek out enemy agents who have come to spy on you, bribe them, and induce them to stay with you, so you can use them as reverse spies. By intelligence thus obtained, you can find local spies and inside spies to employ. By intelligence thus obtained, you can cause the misinformation of dead spies to be conveyed to the enemy. By intelligence thus obtained, you can get living spies to work as planned. Sun Tzu says it is essential for a leader to know about the 5 kinds of espionage, and this knowledge depends on reverse spies. So reverse spies must be treated well. Sun Tzu says, so only a brilliant ruler or a wise general who can use the highly intelligent for espionage is sure of great success. This is essential for military operations, and the armies depend on this in their actions. This is the end of chapter 13. We have reached the end of The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Please comment and subscribe. Leave a like for great success in military operations.